We are very delighted this year to welcome the new Enlightenment Conference to Panmure House and to Edinburgh. This conference as a call to action to make it possible for nations to progress.
Adam Smith believed in an open and just society and in an open and just world order. But today, the market system from which global prosperity has emerged over 2 centuries is now under attack.
We face a really meaningful problem if the next generation, the generation in effect currently at university or of university age, believes that socialism is preferable to capitalism.
We really are able to discuss in a meaningful way some of the problems that are facing the rule of law democracies, as well as some of the solutions that might be available.
At a time when people tear down historic statues in other parts of the world, the Scots are creating new historic statues, presumably for future generations to tear down. It was as if Smith saw modernity coming and realized all the mistakes that we would make in it. What matters in the end is not whether you're socialist or capitalist. That, I think, has become a false dichotomy. What really matters is whether you have the rule of law.
I'm David Teese.
Neil Ferguson.
Orwell Schell.
Sarah Williamson.
Harry Broadman.
Lynn Forrester de Rothschild.
Wei Jianshan.
We are today in an era of what an economist would call, and business people would call, profound uncertainty.
The emerging hegemon country, China, is challenging the current hegemon. And so, because we're not going to have a hot war, we're going to be in a long war.
Too much of the analysis that economists do today, in my view, is incredibly sterile. Context is frequently absent. And that leads economists to make predictions and to give advice that's often, quite frankly, wrong.
No society can surely be flourishing and happy, of which the far greater part of its members are poor and miserable.
What we know is that our system has created horrible problems of wealth inequality. Top 1% controls 42% of the national wealth, and the bottom 90% controls 4.7%. We have wage stagnation. We have dislocation of jobs and loss of jobs from globalization.
Several very big forces are underway that are both feeding each other and creating conflict. The unraveling of the global system that the United States and Britain built after World War II, the system of the IMF, the World Bank, the BIS, the WTO, the United Nations, NATO, all these institutions of shared and collective action. The reality of climate change is not global warming, but extreme weather in more places, more often. We had the Paris Agreement only a few years ago, and it was a remarkable experience of all the nations and many companies of the world coming together to deal with the global crisis.
Greatest challenges we face include growing income inequality, the decline in innovation. We have a loss of a sense of community. I think it is urgent that we in the United States and in other advanced economies look not just at what is good for our business interests and our corporate interests, make sure we have a workforce that gains from the broader prosperity of our economies.
People don't think globalization's working. It's like a runaway train that's out of control. People feel that they're losing out. Suddenly you've got this realization that the majority of production, the majority of manufacturing, the majority of trade and the majority of investment is actually outside the West.
International institutions, including the WTO, are really not up to the task.
What we are sort of grappling with is that very question of where is the primary contradiction in the world today. Both sides of the bipartisan aisle are now sort of so fed up with China that they are willing to potentially run the whole train off the tracks. It's a challenge to the whole system of globalization, which depends on a certain trust and openness. China's been very stubborn all of these years about remedying some of the inequities. Their system depends on maintaining them, and their economic health depends on them maintaining these unfair advantages.
Having built a brand is critically important to be successful in Asia in private equity. We are dealing with a changed environment where market itself is under attack, where globalization is under attack, the global trade system is under attack. And so we have to look at the issues which led us to this particular point. We have to re-emphasize the importance of the principles of the market. And I think this is what this conference is all about.
Came to this conference to explore how we think about the learnings from Adam Smith from a couple hundred years ago with this idea of focusing capital forward on the long term, creating value for companies, for investors, and societies. How do we rebalance capital markets to be longer term? The short-term nature of capital markets is detrimental to companies, to investors, and to communities and societies broadly.
It's punctuated by the US-China trade war and by the current administration who is changing its mind literally almost daily on policy issues. And that kind of uncertainty makes it very difficult for businesses to make plans on investment, to plan their supply chains, to figure out how long-lived their investments should be planned for. The most uncertain economic and trade policy time that I've experienced.
High value added in companies is about two things. It's about production efficiency, but it's also about competitive advantage. You can create high value added by, as Henry Ford did, by having production lines, and that made it just cheaper to produce cars.
Business isn't like that anymore. If we take the great businesses of the world today, we're talking about Amazon and Apple and Microsoft. They're not engaged in repetitive production.
You need to also look at how you create, through innovation, highly productive organizations.
A company brand and ethic that is admired by the community. Companies that take care of their people and the planet and their community and their reputation, have the right culture, are the best long-term investments.
Capitalism has been the driving force behind this incredible growth in economic well-being. There's certainly environmental concerns. There's also really difficult problems in terms of transitions. People who have worked in a particular job in a particular company for decades to find themselves displaced by globalization.
I think business has got to wake up to the fact that these problems are here to stay unless we do something about them. People will become more frustrated about the economic prospects of their children and more frustrated about their own failure to do better. I think the cultural aspects of this populism, again, people's worries about immigration, people's worries about the heterogeneity of their society, about the integration of people. I think in more diverse societies that could become a bigger problem and not a smaller problem if we do nothing.
Nativism on immigration, we have to restrict immigration. Backlash against free trade, we have to impose tariffs. Attacks on corrupt elites, these terrible people who run the place have to go, and the outsiders come to the fore politically. This is the standard formula for populism. In most cases, there's some elements of racism, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, but I don't think that they're the dominant traits. Populism is fundamentally about economic policies changing. It is about tariffs. It is about restricting migration. Populism is quite different from fascism, and it's a category error to use these terms interchangeably. The people who made the left-wing argument that the financial crisis happened, therefore bankers should go to jail, did much worse politically than the people on the populist right who said the financial crisis happened and therefore we should restrict immigration and impose tariffs. And what is very striking is that on both sides of the Atlantic, socialism has made a comeback amongst the young.
I am curious that you omitted any mention of corporatism. I think it is as much, if not more, of a threat.
Democratic capitalist values, the rule of law needs to be maintained. We're in a very dangerous situation now. And indeed, the conference which we're attending specifically addressed to that. What do we do in this day and age?
Smith himself used to have his friends around to his house for Sunday lunch to debate the big issues of the world. That was one of the ways that he sought to work out what to do. The idea of this conference is to replicate what he did, which is to bring great minds together, great intellects here in Edinburgh to try and solve the problems of the world.
The conference was an opportunity to come back
and think in a broader, longer-term historical context about where we've come from and where we're likely to go.
I want to bring the world to Edinburgh to debate the things that matter, to influence policy on the things that matter, and to get people to come up with solutions to the challenges that we face as a world. I believe the best solutions will come from people being brought together to solve these problems, because no one can do it on their own.